Hey there, fellow gardeners. Welcome back to Botanic Haven, your go-to place for all things gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces, both inside your home and out in your yard. I'm so glad you're here today because we're diving into something that honestly could make or break your entire growing season. February might seem like this weird in-between month where winter's still hanging around, but spring is starting to whisper promises of warmer days ahead. But here's the thing that took me years to really understand. February is actually one of the most critical months in the gardening calendar, especially if you want certain crops to actually produce well. I'm talking about those plants that absolutely need to get started in February, or honestly, you might as well skip them entirely for the year. Now, I know that sounds dramatic, but stick with me here because I've learned this lesson the hard way more times than I'd like to admit. Let me tell you about my friend Daisy, who lives just a couple of towns over. She's been gardening for about 15 years now, and every single year she would try to plant her peas in late March, because that's when the weather finally felt nice enough to spend time outside without freezing. And every single year her pea harvest was disappointing. The pods would be small, the plants would struggle in the heat that came too quickly, and she'd end up buying peas from the farmer's market instead of enjoying her own. Then one year I convinced her to try something different. We planted peas together in mid-February, even though there was still frost on the ground some mornings. She thought I was absolutely crazy at first. But when May rolled around and her pea plants were loaded with sweet, plump pods while her neighbour's late-planted peas were barely flowering, she became a complete convert to February planting. That's the kind of difference we're talking about here, so let's get into this properly. When I say certain crops need to be planted in February, I'm talking about cool-season vegetables that actually thrive in cooler temperatures and need that early start to mature before summer heat arrives. These aren't your tomatoes or peppers that want warm soil and lots of sunshine. These are the tough customers that laugh in the face of a light frost and actually taste better when they grow in cooler weather. First up, we've got peas, which I already mentioned, but they deserve way more attention than that. Peas are absolutely magical in the garden because they fix nitrogen in the soil, which means they're actually improving your garden bed while they grow. But here's what most people don't realize. Pea seeds can germinate in soil temperatures as low as 40 degrees Fahrenheit. They want cool weather. They need it. If you wait until April to plant peas in most climates, you're going to get maybe 3 or 4 weeks of harvest before the plants just give up when temperatures hit the 70s and 80s. Plant them in February, though, and you get months of harvest. I'm talking about picking fresh peas from late April all the way through June in many areas. Then there's broad beans, which some people call fava beans. These guys are even tougher than peas. I've seen broad bean plants survive snow, hard frosts, and weather that would kill most other vegetables without even blinking. My neighbour Oliver planted broad beans last February on a day when I could see my breath in the air, and those seeds just sat there in the cold soil for weeks. I honestly thought nothing was going to happen. But then, as soon as the soil warmed up just a tiny bit in March, these sturdy little shoots popped up, and by late spring he had plants that were over 4 feet tall, absolutely covered in flowers and beans. The thing about broad beans is they have this incredibly long growing season. If you don't get them in the ground in February, they won't have time to mature properly before hot weather arrives, and hot weather makes broad beans taste bitter and stop producing. It's really that simple. Spinach is another February essential, and I feel like people really underestimate how much difference timing makes with spinach. I used to think spinach was just this boring salad green that you could plant whenever, but then I started paying attention to what actually happened in my garden. February planted spinach grows slowly and steadily in cool weather, developing these thick, sweet leaves that are absolutely nothing like the thin, bitter leaves you get from spinach planted in warm weather. There's actually a scientific reason for this. When spinach experiences warm temperatures and long days, it bolts, which means it sends up a flower stalk, and all the energy goes into reproduction instead of making those delicious leaves we want to eat. But February planted spinach grows up in cool weather with shorter days, and it just focuses on producing leaf after beautiful leaf. I've had single plants give me harvest for 3 months straight when planted in February. Try that with April planted spinach and you'll get maybe 3 weeks before it bolts. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way, I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. Now let's talk about something that surprised me when I first learned about it. You can actually plant onion sets in February. I always thought onions were a spring crop. something you dealt with in April or May. But onions are actually biennial plants that need a long, cool growing period to develop those big bulbs we all want. When you plant onion sets in February, they have months and months to slowly develop strong root systems and start bulking up before summer arrives. The bigger and stronger the plant gets during cool weather, the bigger the bulbs will be when you harvest them in summer. I started doing this about 5 years ago, and my onion harvest literally doubled in size compared to when I was planting in April. The bulbs are bigger, they store better, and the plants are healthier overall because they're not rushing to mature in increasingly hot weather. Garlic is a bit different because ideally you plant it in fall, but if you miss that window, February is your last chance to get any kind of harvest. I have a friend named Rose who forgot to plant garlic in October one year. She was so disappointed because she loves growing her own garlic. In late February, she just decided to try anyway, figuring she had nothing to lose. She planted some cloves, and while they didn't produce full bulbs like fall-planted garlic would have, she got what's called green garlic, which is basically young garlic plants that you harvest before the bulbs fully develop. The flavour is milder than mature garlic, but still delicious, and she used them in everything from stir-fries to salads. The point is, if you didn't plant garlic in fall, February is your chance to at least get something rather than waiting another whole year. Lettuce is absolutely perfect for February planting, and this is one of those crops where timing really determines whether you get a huge harvest or almost nothing. Lettuce is like spinach in that it hates hot weather and will bolt as soon as temperatures consistently hit the 70s. But unlike spinach, lettuce grows relatively quickly, so you want it to mature during the coolest part of the year. February planted lettuce will be ready to harvest in April and May when the weather is perfect, and you can keep succession planting it every 2 weeks through March and into early April to have fresh lettuce all spring long. I've made the mistake of waiting too long to plant lettuce so many times. You plant it in late April thinking you're being smart by waiting for nice weather, and then by the time it's big enough to harvest, it's June and the lettuce bolts immediately. Such a waste. Radishes are probably the fastest growing vegetable you can plant in February, and they're perfect for beginner gardeners or anyone who wants quick results. From seed to harvest, radishes take about 3 to 4 weeks in spring conditions. Plant them in February and you could be eating homegrown radishes by mid to late March. But here's the cool thing about radishes. They actually help break up compacted soil because they have these strong taproots that push down through the earth. So if you have heavy clay soil like I do, planting radishes in February serves double duty. You get food and you improve your soil structure. Plus, radishes planted in cool weather are crisp and mild. Wait until it's warm, and they get woody and spicy in an unpleasant way. Arugula is another leafy green that absolutely needs to be planted in February if you want to enjoy it at its best. This peppery green is incredible in salads, on pizza, in pasta dishes, and so many other things. But arugula is even more sensitive to heat than lettuce. It bolts at the slightest hint of warm weather. I'm talking about plants that will send up flower stalks when it's barely even 65 degrees outside. But plant arugula in February, and it grows beautifully through March, April, and into May, giving you these tender, flavorful leaves that have just the right amount of peppery bite. My friend Ivy grows arugula every February in containers on her patio because she lives in an apartment without a proper garden. Even in containers, February planted arugula produces incredibly well because it's getting exactly the temperature conditions it wants. Kale is one of those superfoods that everyone talks about, but not everyone realizes that timing really affects how it tastes. Kale that matures in hot weather can be tough and bitter, but kale that grows slowly through cool weather is sweet, tender, and absolutely delicious. February is the perfect time to plant kale because it has a fairly long growing season, usually around 60 to 70 days from seed to harvest. Plant it in February and you'll be harvesting beautiful kale leaves in May when the plant is at its prime. Even better, kale is one of those vegetables that tastes better after a light frost, and in many areas you might still get some cool nights in late March or April that actually improve the flavour of your kale. I've had people tell me they hate kale and then they try kale from my garden that was planted in February and grown in cool weather, and they can't believe it's the same vegetable. Swiss chard is another one of those underrated February crops that really deserves more attention. Chard is incredibly productive, incredibly beautiful with its colourful stems, and it's much more heat tolerant than most leafy greens. But that doesn't mean you should wait to plant it. Starting chard in February means it develops a really strong root system during cool weather, and then when warmer weather comes, it's already well established and just keeps producing leaf after leaf after leaf. I've had single chard plants that I planted in February continue producing well into August and September, long after my lettuce and spinach are completely done for the season. You just keep harvesting the outer leaves, and the plant keeps making new ones in the center. Turnips are one of those old-fashioned vegetables that people don't grow as much anymore, but they're perfect for February planting. Turnips are a cool season root vegetable that matures relatively quickly, usually around 50 to 60 days. They need cool soil to germinate, and they develop the best flavor when they grow in cool weather. Turnips that grow in hot weather become woody and unpleasantly strong flavored. But February planted turnips that mature in April or May are sweet, tender and delicious. You can eat both the roots and the greens, which makes them incredibly productive. I started growing turnips in February a few years ago when a neighbor gave me some fresh ones from his garden, and I was shocked by how good they were. Nothing like the turnips I'd tried before that were probably grown at the wrong time of year. Carrots are tricky because they take a long time to mature, usually 70 to 80 days or more depending on the variety. This means that if you want to harvest carrots in late spring, you need to plant them in February. Carrot seeds germinate slowly in cool soil, which can be frustrating because you're waiting weeks to see anything happen. But that slow start in cool soil actually leads to better root development. Carrots that grow slowly in cool conditions develop sweeter, more complex flavors than carrots that grow quickly in warm soil. I've learned to be patient with February planted carrots. You put the seeds in the ground, you keep the soil moist, and you wait. It feels like nothing is happening for the longest time. Then suddenly these delicate ferny tops appear, and over the next few months you watch them grow while underground those beautiful orange roots are developing. Parsnips are even more patient than carrots, taking 90 to 120 days to mature. This means February is really your only option if you want to harvest parsnips the same year. Parsnips need a long, cool growing season, and they actually taste better after they've been exposed to frost, which converts some of their starches to sugars. I know a gardener named Lucas who swears by his February planted parsnips. He plants them in early February and then he just lets them do their thing all through spring and summer. He doesn't harvest them until fall after the first frost, and he says they're the sweetest, most flavorful parsnips imaginable. That's the thing about parsnips. They need that long season, and starting them in February ensures they have all the time they need. Pak choi, also called bok choy, is a wonderful Asian green that's perfect for February planting. It grows quickly, usually ready to harvest in 40 to 50 days, and it strongly prefers cool weather. Pak choi that grows in hot weather bolts immediately and tastes bitter. But February planted pak choi grows beautifully and develops these crisp, mild stems and tender leaves that are perfect for stir-fries, soups and salads. I love growing pak choi because it's something different from the usual vegetables, and it's so easy to grow when you plant it at the right time. The plants are also quite pretty in the garden with their white stems and dark green leaves. Finally, we need to talk about potatoes. Now, potatoes are interesting because the exact timing depends on your climate, but in many areas, late February is prime time for planting early potato varieties. Potatoes need cool soil to develop tubers, and they don't like growing in hot weather. When you plant potatoes in February, they have cool spring weather to grow and develop their tubers, and you can harvest them in late spring or early summer before the really hot weather arrives. I found that February planted potatoes have fewer pest and disease problems than later planted potatoes, probably because they're growing during a time when many pests aren't active yet. The key is making sure the soil isn't completely frozen or waterlogged. You want cool, workable soil. The thing that connects all of these February crops is that they're designed by nature to grow in cool weather. They evolved in climates where cool seasons were the growing seasons. When we try to force them to grow in warm weather, we're fighting against their basic nature, and we usually end up disappointed. But when we work with their natural preferences and plant them in February, everything just works better. The plants are healthier, they produce more, they taste better, and they have fewer pest and disease problems. It's really that simple. I think one of the biggest mistakes home gardeners make is waiting for weather that feels nice to us before starting to plant. We wait for those warm, sunny days when it's comfortable to be outside for hours. But our comfort and the plant's needs are often completely different things. These February crops don't need warm, sunny days to get started. They need cool soil and cool air temperatures. They need the gradually lengthening days of late winter and early spring. They need exactly what February provides. Of course, February planting does require some adjustment in thinking and technique. You can't just plant seeds in frozen ground and expect them to grow. You need to pay attention to soil conditions. The soil should be workable, meaning you can dig in it and it crumbles rather than forming muddy clumps. If your soil is too wet, wait a few days for it to dry out. If it's frozen solid, you obviously need to wait. But in many climates, there are windows of opportunity in February when the soil is perfect for planting these cool season crops. You might need to clear away some mulch or leaves. You might need to create raised beds that warm up and drain faster than ground-level beds. You might need to use season extenders like row covers or cold frames to protect young seedlings from the harshest weather. I've also learned that starting some of these crops indoors in late January or early February and then transplanting them out in March can work really well in colder climates. Things like kale, chard, lettuce and pak choi can all be started in seed trays inside where it's warm and then moved outside once they're a few weeks old and the weather has moderated slightly. This gives you a head start without asking the seeds to germinate in really cold soil. I do this with my lettuce every year now. I start it indoors in early February, and by late February or early March, I have nice little seedlings ready to go into the garden. They establish quickly and start producing much faster than direct seeded lettuce would. The other thing I want to emphasize is that these February crops set you up for success with the rest of your garden. When you plant cool season crops in February and early spring, you harvest them in May and June, which frees up space for warm season crops like tomatoes, peppers, squash, and beans. You're using your garden space twice in one season. After I harvest my peas, spinach and lettuce in June, I plant beans, cucumbers and late-season crops in the same beds. This kind of succession planting dramatically increases how much food you can grow in a limited space. But it only works if you start with those February crops. If you wait until April to plant everything, you miss the opportunity for this double cropping. I also find that the act of planting in February helps me mentally transition from winter to the growing season. February can be a tough month. Winter is dragging on, but spring still feels far away. Getting out in the garden, even for just an hour on a decent day, and putting seeds in the ground gives me hope and something to look forward to. Knowing that under that cold soil, seeds are sitting there waiting for the right conditions to sprout makes me feel connected to the natural cycles and rhythms of the year. And then when those first green shoots appear in March, it feels like such a victory. You did this. You planted seeds in February when it was cold and maybe even a little unpleasant, and now life is emerging from the soil. So here's my challenge to you. Don't let February pass by without planting at least some of these crops. Start small if you need to. Maybe just plant some peas and lettuce, or try radishes since they're so quick and easy, but plant something in February that needs February planting. Experience the difference it makes. I promise you, once you see how much better these crops perform when planted at the right time, you'll become a February planting convert just like my friend Daisy and so many other gardeners I know. These aren't just random vegetables I'm listing. These are the crops that specifically need February planting to reach their full potential. Miss this window and you're missing out on what could be some of the most productive, delicious and satisfying harvests of your entire gardening year. February is calling and your garden is waiting. Get out there and plant these 15 crops because honestly, if you don't plant them now, you might as well not bother growing them at all this year.